Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
This is the second lecture, and in fact it is a session titled In Conversation with Richard Schechner. Let me first of all explain why I have placed this conversation in the second lecture of module 1 before starting the step-by-step discussion of ideas. It seemed right to place it in the beginning because of the key concerns of the course that have been articulated in this conversation. As perhaps you will slowly discover, the central urge in shaping this course is related to the search for the totality of our being. Very often, we become consumers of meaning rather than their creators. Through various critical and creative ideas, we would like to make a difference in this regard. As you listen to this conversation, you will notice that it revolves around reading, writing, performance in the context of the globalized world. In my view, this is a fitting start to the first module because it sets the tone for our own explorations. You may want to come back to this session after our discussion of many related issues in the other modules. The video course allows for this movement back and forth, and we have taken advantage of it. My conversation with Richard Schechner has been recorded in New York University campus with help from Professor Satya Talwar, my husband and IIT colleague. Let me introduce you to Professor Schechner. Schechner is an eminent theatre director based in New York. He has been a noted presence as a professor of performance studies in Tisch School, New York University, and he is widely seen as the founder of performance studies as an academic discipline. Through his untiring effort, he has supported dialogue on theatre and performance across various countries and cultures. He has argued for thinking of performance as an all-encompassing term, with theatre as one of its categories. He has also been the editor of the prestigious journal, The Drama Review, which gave a platform for challenging prevailing restrictive ideas about theatre and performance. For a fuller introduction to his outstanding contributions, we would like you to check out the website that we have mentioned. You can actually check out many other websites if you get interested in Professor Schechner's ideas and his work. My conversation with Professor Schechner actually started way back in the 80s, and it covered many cultural issues pertaining to writing and performance processes. Professor Schechner is a great listener, forever ready to share his viewpoint. At the outset, I'd like to thank him for sharing his ideas and concerns with us for this video course. It may be pointed out that Professor Schechner has spent a lot of time in India, and for those who are familiar with his directorial adventures, which also actually has been a very important part of the counterculture of the 60s in the United States, his work on Ram Leela of Ramnagar may seem anachronistic. But then globalization has thrown up many unpredictable areas of search and artistic combinations. In my conversation with Professor Schechner, a range of issues have been raised by me, keeping in mind their relevance for this video course. The resonances of these concerns will be palpable as you move on with the course material. Do take notes, undertake required reading, and then examine the ideas critically. We would recommend follow-up on the resources that have been identified by Professor Schechner to extend your artistic and intellectual horizons. So now here is the session with Professor Richard Schechner.
Hi Richard.
Hello.
I basically want to talk to you in the context of the creative writing course, where I'm trying to encourage students to be producers of meaning rather than consumers of meaning.
Okay.
And they don't seem to see too many plays and they don't read too many scripts of drama. And therefore, keeping that in mind, I think it would be wonderful to get your sense of how you have enlarged the notion of performance, competitive performances on the dimension.
Okay. So, what do you want me to start with? All right, well, okay. So, I think of performance as a broad spectrum of behavior. And if you think of it as a rainbow with a big arc, you have on one side ritual, that's one foundation, and on the other side you have play, that's another foundation. And between ritual and play is this large arc. And it includes things, of course, like theater and dance and music, what we call the aesthetic performance genres, but it also includes things like classroom teaching, or a video game, or all different kinds of play, popular entertainments, film, performances in everyday life, such as when someone goes to an interview for business, where you have to play a role of being somebody that the person who is offering the job wants to have work with them. Or if you go out on a date and you're meeting someone of the opposite gender and you want to look nice and be good for them, so you are performing a role. You're actually putting on a costume, you look in a mirror, you put on a face. If you're a woman, you might put on some makeup, make sure your hair is good, etc., etc., etc. And we all know that those roles are intense and to some degree temporary. As you get to know the person better, you kind of drop those things, and sometimes people are quite surprised. Oh, that's the way you really look. That's the way you really are, etc., etc. But I don't think it's true that that's not the way people really are. People really are different under different circumstances. So you have play, games, sports, popular entertainment, performance in everyday life, everyday rituals. Everyday ritual would be, what do you do when you get up in the morning? How do you wash your hands? How do you prepare yourself for the day? But then there's secular rituals, like when a president or a prime minister gets inaugurated or begins office. There's also kind of ceremonies when there are military parades. In ball games, there are rituals that surround the beginnings and endings of the ball games. The Olympics are full of rituals because at the winning athlete stands, and then the gold medal stands up, and the silver medal next, and the bronze. The flags are raised, the national anthems are played. And of course, there's religious ritual, the Hindu puja, or the service in a mosque, the 5 times a day call to prayer, or the prayers in a Jewish synagogue or a Christian church. And also some of the religions of humanity that are not, quote, the main great religions, things that are practiced in Australia, in Native America, in Africa, different kinds of religions. They're all full of rituals, which are organized behaviors in which we are not exactly ourselves. So I would say performance is when I am not myself, but I am not myself. I am somewhere between myself and someone who is not me. And I play back and forth among these. Even an actor in a film or in a theater piece, when the director says stop, they just become another person. When they say go, they become the person that they are. So we're very well trained from early on to perform these various roles. Some of them we perform professionally and underline and point out, now I am playing a role. And some of them are quite unconscious.
That's great. I'm sure students will have a lot to think about. Can I turn my attention to your work as a theatre director?
Sure.
And what has been particularly interesting to us, we talk it during the course of creativity discussions is the fact that you went back to theatre for your experimental work also, and you talked about the tragic vision that grips you. This plus the fact that you've done Faust and you've also done Shakespearean scripts, would you sort of give a sense of what drove you to those resources?
Well, of course, I was attracted to the Greek tragedies when I was a very, very young man. The first thing I ever published in a scholarly journal was an essay about Euripides' Bacchae, which I later made that play into Dionysus in '69, a very famous experimental performance. But 10 years before that play, that production I was writing about it. And there are two reasons, really, that I was drawn to the Greek. One is historical and one is thematic. The historical reason is that it's probably the earliest formal theater we have in the world. I mean, it's earlier than Kalidasa and the Sanskrit drama. We don't know, there might be something else discovered, but it's like 2,500 years ago, and they were fully developed plays. So, being in the theater, I want to say, what were the first plays that we know is fully developed? But there's a Greek myth that Venus is born fully grown from the head of Zeus. So these dramas are like great. So they may be very early, but they don't in any sense seem primitive or unformed. They seem like they're fabulous, they're finished. And they involve the whole community through the chorus, but they also tell fabulous stories. You know, almost all of them. The story of Antigone, who would rather die than see her brother dishonored, who fights against the unjust king, who, in a sense, loses Creon. He loses his daughter-in-law, and he loses his own son. Or Oedipus, who is such a just and good man, but finds out in trying to do the job, let's say, of a policeman, investigating who murdered the former king, finds out it was he that murdered the former king. I mean, it still sends thrills up and down my spine to realize that I am guilty of the crime I am seeking to find the guilty one for. And the Greek tragedies also deal with people who are not evil. I mean, in some sense, in Shakespearean, I'll get there, Shakespeare deals with good people and bad people. In Greek tragedy, almost everyone is good, and they clash on their goodness. And that's what happens in our actual life. It's not that we're so bad most of the time. There are great villains in the world, of course, but most ordinary people are not bad. But when they clash, when two good things clash, when you have to decide between, am I going to side with my child on this or with my spouse on this, and I see both sides, but I have to decide, and one is going to be very angry at me. What do? I love both of them. You know, so Greek tragedy raises those questions. Shakespearean I went to Shakespeare because I am a native-born English speaker. So if the Greeks were the earliest plays in world theater, the earliest plays in my Western tradition, then Shakespeare is the greatest writer in my language. And to be in the theater and not confront and deal with the greatest writer in your language, I mean, it just doesn't make sense. And also, the great thing about Shakespeare is he's free. You know, you can just go online. You don't have to pay any money to read these plays. You have to pay money even to go into a great museum. So you have to pay a little bit of money to see the Mona Lisa. You don't have to pay a rupee to see and to read Shakespeare. So why everybody doesn't read Shakespeare, I don't know. He's a great storyteller. He has great characters. They're both comic and tragic. I've been particularly fascinated with Hamlet, and I've done 3 versions of Hamlet. One most recent called Imagining Home, mostly about Ophelia. I get involved in these plays, and the other plays as well. In other words, the Faust story, the story of power, and Marlowe's Faustus, Dr. Faustus, another great play. I've also been very drawn to modern playwrights like Chekhov and Brecht, especially. Now, I know Brecht is very important in India, at least he was when I was there, because he's a playwright, first of all, who draws on Asian performance traditions, not necessarily Indian, more Chinese, but certain qualities of performance that are non-European, that are Asian, namely that the character and the player stand next to each other. They don't merge. In realism, they merge. In Brechtian theater and in Chinese opera, perhaps in Jatra and some other traditional forms in India, the character and the actor stand and comment on each other. And Brecht also has a highly developed social sense and a sense of justice and social justice, and he writes great dialogue and fine stories as well, both tragic and comic at the same time. I've directed Mother Courage and Her Children, which is a tragic story, has some comic elements in it, is a tragic story. But then there are other plays like The Good Woman of Sichuan or Caucasian Chalk Circle, which explore again these human dilemmas. So I also am attracted to drama as such, to theater, because it's about behavior. I am not an artist. I'm not a reflective artist so much. I mean, I do drawings in my notebooks, but I'm not a visual artist. I don't like to put down on paper and make it still. I like behavior. So being a person who's interested in behavior, I'd be drawn to theater or film.
Let's turn to your work in India. And very briefly, I know it's such a vast area of concern, but in retrospect, since you've interacted a lot with Indian theatre practitioners, you've studied Ramlila, in retrospect, would you comment on the kind of value you assign to intercultural work?
Right.
Especially, because of this whole burgeoning sense of globalization.
Right. Well, it's a very complex question. Let me just review briefly my experiences in India. I came to India first in October 1971. I'm sure that's before everyone of the students, probably before their parents were born, not only before they were born. And I came there, and it was my first time that I was outside of the European-American sphere of things. And so I was very shocked in a good sense. It was just different. But I stayed in India at that time for 4 months. And during those 4 months, I really saw a great deal of particularly folk and classical performance, because I was fortunate enough to meet. The very first week I was there, I met Suresh Avasti, who at that point was the secretary of the Sangeet Natak Academy. And we took to each other, we liked each other very much. And Suresh said, he said, "What do you want to do here?" And I said, "Well, I'm not so interested in the Taj Mahal or the Jaipur palaces. I mean, it's okay, but I can see them in a picture. I'm not interested. I want to see behavior. I want to see performances." He says, "Good. I will make letters to all these people." So under his tutelage, I saw Jatra and Chow and, of course, Bharatanatyam and Kuchipudi and Kathak, the classic dances, and I saw contemporary theater and Pan Patar and theater in all regions of India. So I traveled as far north and west as Kashmir, and as far south as Kanyakumari, and I hit all of the great cities. I was in Kolkata, I was in Chennai when it was called Madras, I was in Kerala, of course, which I returned to, I was in Bombay when it was called Mumbai, and so I saw performances there, and I learned about India several things in that first trip. First of all, that it is at one level a unified culture, and at another level many, many, many different cultures. So in a certain sense, India is a model of its own globalization. Let's put it that way. India is not India, and it was probably even more so before the partition between India and Pakistan. And the final months that I was there, I was in Kolkata, and it was the time of the Indo-Pak War and the liberation of Bangladesh, or when Bangladesh became independent. And I got very involved in the politics of that war, actually, and I protested the presence of the American Fifth Fleet, I think it was, which was there to support Pakistan. And I was for the liberation of Bangladesh, or the independence of Bangladesh. So I was involved in Indian society and culture at several levels. After that, I returned to India many times. I saw and continue to study Ramlila, but not all Ramlilas, particularly the Ramlila of Ramnagar, which is right across the Ganga from Banaras, or Varanasi. And I've lived there, and I've lived in India for as long as 11 months at a stretch. And the last time I was in India was barely a year ago. when I was at a conference about Natya Shastra in Varanasi. And also I directed Cherry Kabagicha, which is Cherry Orchard, at the professional repertory company at the National School of Drama. And then I brought Mother Courage and Her Children, which was, actually I did Mother Courage earlier, which was a production we did here in New York to India. And we toured it to Bhopal and Lucknow and Calcutta and Bombay and Delhi and a small village near Kolkata called Sinjol. And again, Avasti was very helpful in that. So were many, many Indian people. And actually, the end of this week, Nisar and Amal Alana are going to be my house guests. So I'm very close friends, and Nisar designed the set and Amal the costumes for Cherry Kabagicha. She's the head of the National School of Drama. Her father was Abraham Al-Ghazi, who started the National School of Drama. So I'm very deeply enmeshed in all of that. And in terms of globalization, I probably don't have the politically correct viewpoint. But my viewpoint is that ultimately, at our root, we are all one thing, genetically speaking. It was whoever they were, it was very few people in Africa. And then we look at these trees in this garden, there's one root, and then look at that leaf and that leaf over there. So they're very, very different, but at root they're the same. So at one level, I feel that globalization is a return to a certain kind of rootedness, a return to the difficult but proper recognition that we're one species. At the same time, we don't want to all look like the same leaf. So the problem with globalization, there are two problems with globalization, or let's say challenges. One is the classic one, to not be exploited. Colonial exploitation existed, and global exploitation existed. So does national and local exploitation. In other words, exploitation, unfortunately, cannot be localized among one group or one system. It seems that human beings do take advantage of each other, and there are generous human beings and there are selfish ones. Or let's put it, there are times when people act generously and times when they act selfishly. So to accomplish the collaboration of globalization without the exploitation is one aspect. The other problem is this leveling. We don't want to make the whole world look like a transit lounge in the airport with always the same brands, the same clothes, the same language, and so on. So I feel we need to find some way to get over the national phase. I do think that the national phase of human history has caused a lot of bloodshed, just like the intensely religious phase has caused a lot of bloodshed. So to perhaps keep nations, perhaps keep religions, but not to kill over them. And we have to, if we look it straight in the face, more blood has been spilled because people say you believe the wrong thing or you're in the wrong place than for any other cause. Or maybe disease is an equal cause. But disease we make progress about. We have 6 billion people on the earth now instead of 2 billion because we've conquered some diseases. But we haven't conquered our wish for power. We haven't conquered war. So globalization, which features trade and cooperation at one level, is, I think, in balance, from my point of view, a good thing if it can be made to be a good thing. And again, I think of India as a model. I'm all for Hinduism, but I'm not for Hindutva. I'm all for Islam, but I'm not for Sharia. In other words, it's a question of a certain kind of balance, or whatever you want to call it. So my view is that, the third thing is that globalization is not going to go away. We're not going to be just like Luddites in the 19th century said, get rid of the machine. Well, that was nice, and maybe a few people could go and live on a farm and get rid of the machine, but we're surrounded by machines. We're not going to get rid of genetic engineering. We're not going to get rid of globalization. We're not going to get rid of world trade. We're not going to get rid of that iPad you're holding in your hand, which is conceived in California, manufactured in Shenzhen, China, and sold wherever. And so that even though somebody may be opposed to globalization, we're always participating in it. I don't know where this shirt was made, but it wasn't made where we're sitting. I don't even know where your clothes were made, but possibly in India, which is a great place to make clothes, but possibly in Cambodia or Thailand or somewhere. So it's not going to go away. So the question then is how to make it serve human justice, how to make it serve human creativity.
All right. Two more questions I'm getting really. One is that any new experimental formative form that you think the students should see, especially on the interface of with science and technology.
Well, yes, but I don't know. They should go on a website run by a group, an American group called Builders Association. And in GDR we have a big interview with them. I did an interview with some of their artists, including Marianne Weems, who is their artistic director. And they work very, very closely with the most advanced digital technology and performance. And one of their pieces, which is well documented, is called Aladdin. I don't know if you know it. It's about call centers in India. And it features actually people in the theater here making calls to India and talking, so it's both live and media at the same time. And they have others about the recreation of jet airliners and those experiences. They're very much dealing with the very, very contemporary media revolution. That means that people sit in Bangalore and answer the phone pretending to be Americans, thinking of performance. In other words, they cannot have a British Indian accent. They're supposed to sound like an American. And they say, "Hi, my name is Tom." Well, their name may be Satya, or their name may be Guruji, or whatever. Their name is not Tom. But since they're dealing with people who will be more comfortable with people who are like themselves, they say that. Now, I assume that if an Indian caller calls, they say, "Hello, my name is Satya." In other words, the idea is to be like the caller. So this group deals with these, not only this, they do a whole series of performances that technologically speaking. Then there's a group called the Critical Art Ensemble, CAE. Again, my journal TDR writes about them. And they deal with genetic engineering and recombinant DNA from a performative point of view. They both are very critical of it, and they examine it, and they play with it. Then there's another group called the Yes Men. I don't know if you know the Yes Men. So the Yes Men is a performance group that kind of pushes the great corporations to own up to some of their crimes. So, for example, and this one will be of interest to people in India, Union Carbide owned the plant that gave off the poisonous gases in Bhopal about 10 years ago or so, killed thousands of people, and they've never paid the relatives of these victims what they should have, and they've never really acknowledged that they had committed a great crime, even if it was accidental. It wasn't a crime of meaning to commit a crime, but some crimes, like Oedipus's, are unintentional. So the Yes Men pretend to be Union Carbide. So they went on television and said, "Hello, we are the CEO of Union Carbide." And they dress up and they tell me, and we are saying to the people of Bhopal, "We are apologizing to you, and we're distributing $5 million. And of course, the next day, Union Carbide has to get on television and say, "They're not really us. We're not giving any money," and so they're exposed. So the Yes Men is a group that you really have to look at. So those are three groups: Critical Art Ensemble, Builders Association, and Yes Men, that I would think that the students who are interested in science and technology and in this new kinds of performance might want to look at.
Finally, Richard, can you share with us your favorite short story writers on the list?
Well, right, they're not going to be again. My favorite, I don't, it depends who I'm reading. At the present moment, I've gone back to some older writers. So at the present moment, I'm reading Dickens. And I've never read Dickens since I was in high school. Maybe I didn't read him then. So now I've read David Copperfield, and Great Expectations, and Bleak House, and The Tale of Two Cities, and I like him as a storyteller. So he would not be one of the great writers, I think, but he's pretty good. And then I also read Virgil's Aeneid, which is an ancient story roughly at the same time that the Ramayana was being written, and it's about the fall of Troy and the establishment of Rome. But if you ask me in terms of contemporary writers, a short story writer I like very much is Flannery O'Connor, who is very, very good. She's not contemporary, she's 3 generations ago, but she's very good. Then there's Paul Auster, who is contemporary, and I've worked with Paul in the theater. His work is very good. Of classic people, the great classics of the European novel, Flaubert and Stendhal and Dostoevsky and Tolstoy, I like Gunter Grass and some of his work. There's a new writer called Jeremy Latham I like. There's Pahuk wrote Snow Orphan Pahuk. I like Salman Rushdie. I'm not so different than most people. My real field is not literature, so I read for pleasure. I don't read when I read drama or when I go to the theater. I'm doing it for pleasure, but it's also my profession. But when I pick up a novel, it's simply because I want to read something. I've also read some nonfiction that I recommend. Steven Pinker, who's a Harvard psychologist, who wrote The Better Angels of Our Nature about violence and the decline of violence. I found that a very significant book. I don't know. You know this book? And I think it's a very interesting book. It's one of the few books that has changed my way of thinking. So when I'm talking about globalization, I was thinking of his 5 reasons why violence has relatively declined. And he gives these reasons of feminization and global trade and democratization. I think it's a very powerful book.
Thank you so much, Richard. It's always lovely talking to you.
Thank you. Goodbye.